Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seat as the session is about to start.
distinguished participants, we would like now to introduce the first GNF session of the International Astronautical Congress. The session is organized by the Italian Space Agency and is entitled Italians Do It Better, a space menu for a healthy body and mind. I would like to introduce now to you the two moderators we have here today. Marta Del Bianco, researcher at the Italian Space Agency, and MiCo Bellucci, technologist at the Italian Space Agency. Please give them a warm welcome.
Dove lo mettiamo? O se no, noi due, vai più in fondo. Metto qua, dai. Sì, ok. Avevo capito che noi non stavamo al centro. Vabbè, ok.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today at the first GNF at this IAC. Today on this stage, in addition to myself and my colleague MiCo, is going to be Antonio Gattulli from Subalimenta Israel. Giorgia Pontetti from Ferrari Farm. And we have a special guest who is kindly joining us, Walter Villadet.
Okay. Before starting, just a technical issue. If you would like to make questions, please pop up the quad core who are appearing after this slide, and then we will be able to answer to all your questions at the end of this session.
Welcome to, this is the QR code for the questions. Welcome to this GNF, Italians Do It Better. Today we're going to talk about the heritage of the Italian community in the food production for space exploration. And of course, we will hint at the future of how Italy can contribute to food production for space. So, next slide. So we all know that food has always been at the center of space exploration. Yuri Gagarin, very short flight, he had food to consume during his journey. Why? Why send food with a cosmonaut that is going to be in space for just 90 minutes? Because food is the limit that you need to actually allow for longer journeys, because when a mission is longer than a day, your astronaut will need to drink and eat food. So food has evolved through time from unbearable and unedible dried and processed food to what is eaten on the International Space Station nowadays. But for the future, we will see the in-situ food production taking center stage to slowly integrate the diet and substitute food coming from Earth to allow for the human presence beyond low Earth orbit and to the Moon and then to Mars.
So, and when we think about healthy food, obviously we have to think, we cannot forget to mention the Mediterranean diet that is actually, can provide, that is a diet that it's based, that it combines the variety of vegetables coming along around the Mediterranean area and typical traditional dishes of Italy. And the Mediterranean diet is can provide a good balance of nutrients, minerals, and vitamins. It's based on vegetable, cereal, and meat, eggs and cheese. And this is actually provides the support actually a healthy lifestyle and well-being, psychophysical and mentally health beings. So, but an important phase, an important feature of the Mediterranean diet is the commensality and conviviality. And this is actually one of the things that we can think that space can take from this, that space can also take from this, this diet. And for this reason, we would like to ask Colonel Villadei, which is his experience on conviviality and his experience of meal and conviviality in the space. I mean, how do you experience this, this characteristic of the meal?
Right, so first of all, good afternoon, and it's a good way to start the afternoon right after lunch, talking about food. So, and yes, food is, as you mentioned at the very beginning, a need for the astronauts. So we need to eat and drink a certain amount of calories and quantity for being healthy. I see some of the doctors in the room that, I mean, take care a lot about what we eat on the ISS. So basically, the first point is we need to eat because this is a need. Then food is normally an opportunity even for being together. During our mission, Axiom 3 mission, we brought an experiment dealing with the food, quite, I mean, famous Italian food, pasta. And there are two nice angles to pick up. One is related with the fact that food can even be a kind of an experiment. So trying to see how you can foster for technology enhancement when you talk about food, especially in the first picture you were mentioning about something about the moon and then Mars. But of course, it's an opportunity for being together. So in terms of conviviality, what normally astronauts do, they used to work during the day till the late afternoon, I would say. So we have from 6:30 till 10 p.m. time for having lunch. And while doing the lunch, we are together, I mean, very rarely, because normally we are supposed to do our job based on the timeline. The dinner is a good opportunity for gather all together in Node 1, and then we can talk, share the experience, see how the day went during our activities, and of course, have a dinner. So the point is the dinner and actually the food, generally speaking, is quite a variety, more the ISS. All of us, we can make a kind of a personal menu, so we can try to see if we can adjust our expectations during the flight. And normally your taste or the way in which you perceive the food slightly change a little bit, and then it's adjusted over the time of the mission. But definitely there's a kind of a trade inside the ISS. So we had American food, some specific food rations provided by Axiom, and of course there are rations. So there's a kind of trade inside the ISS, and you can share what you prefer in terms of food. But definitely it's a perfect opportunity to share some nice and I mean pleasant moments all together, especially over the weekend when normally the crew has some free time and we have more time just to enjoy the dinner or lunch or even the breakfast.
Okay, thank you very much. And obviously, when we think about sharing food, we have to mention the appetizer, because in an Italian meal, usually the appetizer is the moment when the meal starts, and it's the moment when people start to interact with each other, to ask which are their interests, their taste, and usually it's a meal that it's shared between the people. And for our menu today, we choose two appetizers. The that actually are perfectly in line with the Mediterranean diet, and the pate, black olives pate, and dried tomatoes. And Antonio, would you like to tell us more about the pate, black olives pate?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for this talk, and I want to thank first the Italian Space Agency, Barbara Negri, MiCo, and Marta, because we know how many efforts you did to be here today, so thank you first. The company I represent was born in 1888. And we started to produce space food just in 2007, after a casual meeting with NASA. Since 2007, we have produced and we have supplied 3 different missions. And this is one of the starters we supplied, if I remember, the second one. Why we choose olives? The company has its roots in Apulia. That's very famous for the olives. And we have a great story about the cultivation of the olives and the olive oil. So the mission was to find a product that could be freeze-dried easily in order to be rehydrated on the ISS. We selected the black olives pate because olives has great nutrition facts, starting from its content of polyphenols and phytosterols that keep the body ready, gives energy, and avoid the absorption of cholesterol. So that's the reason we selected this kind of pate. And there is another reason, more convivial. Olives belong to many cultures in the world, not only Italian one, not only in the Mediterranean. So we created this because we think this could be a great idea to keep astronauts all together and meeting during lunch.
Okay, thank you very much, Antonio. And Giorgia, would you like to tell us more about the beneficial aspect of tomatoes?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. As you have already told, the fresh vegetables have a lot of property in terms of diet. Especially tomato is full of antioxidants, so it's a countermeasure, natural countermeasure against the radiations that we have in space. So from our point of view, we produce hydroponic tomato, and we have demonstrated that maintaining all the parameters under control, so light, nutrients, and so on, we can enrich the tomato property. So as in your picture, we can lead to a tomato that instead of red, it becomes purple. So it means it's more rich in lycopene, more rich in antioxidants. So we can have a natural countermeasure eating fresh or eating a dried tomato.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Giorgia. So we've seen that appetizer make us come together, but of course there are some dishes from the Italian culture that make us come together because they are so good. And for our first course, we chose a barley norma with eggplant and tomatoes. I don't know how many of you know this dish, which is typical of the Sicilian region of Italy. It's typical of Catania, which is the mother city of Bellini, who of course wrote Norma. So this dish is named after the opera. And of course everyone knows lasagna. And so these meals are rich in carbohydrates. Of course, they're going to give the majority of the calories. So they're very important as a stowage food for long duration missions. But with long stowage comes the problem of preparing food. We already heard from our guests how the technicalities of choosing the right food to be prepared for space. And how difficult it is or easy it is to prepare it in space. So I would like to ask our guests if they could give their thoughts on how difficult it is to prepare food. Is the texture maintained during preparation and rehydratation? Tell us about your experience.
Well, it depends very much on the kind of food. So how we prepare the food in space is quite easy. You have two options. So the first one is you can add water on dehydrated food, and then it depends on the quantity and the temperature. So you can rehydrate food, and the other option is to warm it up. So you can put in a kind of two electrical plates, and then by conduction is raised up the temperature. So it's quite easy, I would say, to prepare food. It's a little bit trickier to consume food because it depends on very much. Normally we have just a couple of utensils. We have a spoon with a long spoon, and then a fork, but it's almost never used. So you have to handle with this tool to avoid that everything is floating around, and it happens. So from time to time. So one takeaway from my personal experience was, okay, prepare the food is quite easy, but maybe we can even try to think about some packages a little bit more advanced in order to allow the users to more comfortable in consuming the food. But even if you want to mix up something, for instance, in my case, in the experiments we did, for instance, I was supposed to add some olive oil by chance, and it was more difficult because the packages didn't have a specific pouches for putting inside. So the way in which we think the food should include all the chain of the actions the astronauts are supposed to take, like not only the preparation, but the consuming the food as well. Generally speaking, it's not that difficult because, again, it's quite an easy set of options. Maybe it could, when it comes to future development, if we want to have a more complicated or sophisticated food, astronauts can be involved in making some more, sophisticated preparations, and that would be even interesting from the convivial standpoint because an opportunity to be together. So I would say at the moment is the set of options astronauts have on board are quite limited. So we don't have much to do apart putting the water in the right quantity. Be careful sometimes because some easy operations could turn to be quite dangerous if you are not very, cautious when you add hot water and the quantity is not the same. It can pop out of the devices which normally provides water. But having said that, it's not really very difficult. And then the other thing is that you can imagine everything on the ISS, which takes mass and volume, is supposed to be stored somewhere. So once you have to finish, you have to clean it up, everything you have been using, and then you have to store and get as much as possible compacted so then you can store waiting for the subsequent disposal. So all these kind of steps should be considered.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So,
Can I?
Yes, go.
So,
if you want to add something, Marta.
I just wanted to connect with the next course. You've seen that we chose two dishes that are one vegetarian and one has meat. And this is a peculiarity of the Italian cuisine, which is it's very diverse and is very inclusive. So it is very welcoming for all type of dietary restrictions, and it was easy for us to choose again a meal that was vegetarian for those who decide to stick to this kind of diet. And I think that the main course also falls into this in this variety that is both vegetarian and with fish.
Yes. So for the other meal, So far we speak about vegetables, the appetizer, and also the carbohydrates. But another component that is very important in a dietary is actually the proteins, because we all know that the space flight hazard have a serious effect on the body and the mental health. And, but we also know that the distance from Earth makes the mitigation to this hazard quite difficult to cope to. So we need to provide astronauts, and we need to be prepared for the future human exploration mission to provide food that is actually help the body to maintain and to overcome the body issue that the astronaut can face during the space flight. So we, for instance, we know that there is a problem with the bone. Astronauts face very big issues with the musculoskeletal systems, but also with this, because actually microgravity and the absence of mechanical stress on the bones leads to bone loss and also a decrease in bone loss and an imbalance in the osteoclastis. And for this reason, for the pre-workout main course, we choose these two dishes: the spelt salad with Mediterranean tuna, dried tomato, pine nuts, and asparagus. And sorry, but I cannot see. The spelt salad, spelt is very high in iron, and it's what actually astronauts can astronauts can face iron deficit. And tuna is rich in omega-3, and it's very good for the mental, and it's good to prevent neurodegenerative disease, but also help in it's a good source of protein. And the pine nuts as well is rich in omega-3, and the asparagus again is rich in minerals and vitamins. The Parmigiana is part of the bonus food of Luca Parmitano, and it was is made up of aubergine, cheese, and tomatoes. And the aubergine as well have a lot of main components are fiber and minerals, and has a lot of antioxidants. While cheese is important to provide actual calcium. And
and maybe we can talk about like a very important topic for food production in space is the menu fatigue. So it is important to give astronauts variety of taste, variety of texture, to keep astronauts interested in eating, because as my colleague was saying, space is very demanding on the body. It's a workout. So we need to keep astronauts well fed. And to be well fed is not just about the nutrients which are in the food, but also wanting to eat. So we think that one of the strengths of this menu is the variety. is we think that the variety of the Italian cuisine in general, but especially of these dishes that have contributed to the food in space, can help decreasing the risk of menu fatigue for restaurants. And I don't know if anyone wants to make a comment about menu fatigue and how food can help contrasting this.
In realizing the menu for the astronauts, we were very careful about two main aspects: the nutrition, of course, but also we took care about the needs of the single astronauts in terms of flavors and preferences about single dish. Some astronauts preferred pasta, short one, of course, with tomato or couscous. Other ones prefer cereals, as we saw, for example, the barley. What does it mean? It means that, Colonel, let me say that it's not just a way to give you energy, but it's also a way to feel you a little bit closer to his motherland. So it's very, very important to select every single menu for every single astronaut. So I can say it's a custom-made menu. And in Italy, in Italian cuisine, we have a lot of great dishes, great ingredients from north to the south. So it's a great variety to select which kind of vegetables or pasta shapes or all other menu that astronauts can prefer.
Thank you.
If I may add, the other interesting thing is that your taste normally changes on board during the flight. So my direct experience was, especially over the first days when you are getting used to flying microgravity and your body is adjusting itself, I was more in favor of sweet drinks or food rather than the salty ones that normally I prefer. So the other point is not all you tasted on ground. Normally we go through a food selection, so you can try everything. Then in the end, it turned out that it's a little bit slightly different when you fly to space. So, and of course, this may happen the first time. Maybe the second time you already know how your body is going to adjust, and you may define a little bit differently your menu. But it's another interesting part of the story is that whatever you've been used to taste on the ground can change when you fly on board. And of course, it's a physiological adaptation, but nevertheless, it's quite interesting because sometimes we ended up in having some specific kind of foods running out of them and others that were stored there and nobody wanted. So that's quite interesting to me.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. So we heard about food as a countermeasure. We heard about proteins, we heard about antioxidants, but of course, side dishes, so vegetables, are a key ingredient to maintain our health. They give us fibers, they give us antioxidants, they give us vitamins, which are important for our health, so contrasting the insurgence of cancer, but also they're very important for our gut microbiome, which is something that has been very much studied in the last few years, not only on Earth, but also for space exploration. So far, we've talked about preserved food. Of course, there's plenty of preserved side dishes on the International Space Station, I've heard. We have selected caponata, which is a typical Italian side dish, which is composed of various vegetables cooked together with olives and pine nuts. But of course, for the future, we talk about in situ production of fresh food. we talk about vegetables, and to talk about vegetables, I think Georgia can help us.
Yeah, sure. We believe that for the future we must have food production in situ, or on the International Space Station, or on the moon when we'll be on the moon. So for this, hydroponic is a great tool in order to cultivate directly where we need. The advantage is that not only feed and, as you've told, ingest fibers, vitamins, and so on, but it's also to improve the crew morale, because there are a lot of studies that demonstrate that taking care of plant can also improve the brain, can also improve the morale of all the crew, and also can be something to be together. So taking care of salad or small tomatoes growing directly on situ can also solve some problems during the living together, because usually astronauts are from different countries with different uses, with different kitchens, cuisines, and so on. So taking care together of vegetables is also something that improves morale and mental and physical well-being, else that fibers, vitamins, and so on.
I actually never thought about the conviviality of growing vegetables. So I guess food makes astronauts come together at many stages, both growing and cooking.
Okay,
And I don't know if maybe Colonnello Villadei, did you eat any fresh food on the ISS during?
I was not so lucky. No.
Would you like to become an astro gardener? For the future?
Next time, maybe we can plan for having some fresh food during the mission. No, but I mean, and I take the opportunity just, I mean, to share a few comments, and then unfortunately I have to leave for other activities. But my point is, and we've been trying to do these kind of things during the missions, and the experiment was just one portion of this general idea, is that of course we as Italy have a huge culture in food. And if we look at the expansion of the exploration in terms of moon, and then in maybe not so many years after yesterday to go to Mars, we may need to change our approach to the food. We can't, of course, bring everything from the ground. We need to have some kind of capabilities to harvest either way on the moon, on Mars, something. Of course, this takes some technology development. It is important, but what I would like to stress is that it's not just a matter of technology, but technology should be considered a tool without losing the trace of our culture. So in food, that's the roots of our culture, and we can really have a lot. And I guess the Italian food, and it would be nice to have the first meal on the moon based on the Italian food, for instance. Why not? So I would say food, so far it's been always a kind of commodity. As you mentioned at the opening, astronauts needs to drink and eat, but then it can really be something more useful, even as a kind of technology challenge, which can even help on the ground to improve, increase, and make more efficient our process in making food. So it's a huge opportunity, especially for a country like Italy, which has a great tradition in food.
Okay.
So thank you for the opportunity to share some comments with all of you. So I wish I mean, a successful next 70 minutes. And thank you, Asi, for having invited me at this event, and good luck. See you around.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming. So we thank again Colonnello Villadei. And of course, we can't. No, wait.
Okay, sorry.
Wait. Because we can't talk about Italian food and the Mediterranean diet without talking about olive oil. Olive oil is not only rich in antioxidants, in vitamin E, and you have to remember that quite often consuming antioxidants and vitamins as supplements don't have the same effect as having them through whole food. So it is important to understand the role of these foods in our health. And olive oil, however, is also an amazing flavor enhancer. Okay, so you've seen Scott Kelly consuming the first salad that was produced in veggie. If you look at the video, not just the short video, but the whole video, you can see that he has something in his hand. And what he has is one of these. These are this actually has been to space. This bottle has been to the ISS for a year. It's part of a study that we have done in collaboration with CREA on the stowage of olive oil in space conditions. And this is what is used on the ISS for olive oil. Because, of course, there is no pouring in space, because there is, at least not on the ISS. We are in microgravity conditions, so olive oil and any liquids have to be spread with this type of bottles. So we did this experiment. It was very interesting, but the take-home message of this is olive oil is. Oh yeah, sorry, I was telling you about Scott Kelly. I forgot. He has something in his hand, and this is what he has. He has olive oil in his hands, and you can see he talks to his colleagues. He says, "Oh, it's good." If you read the lips, he says it's good. And what he does, he puts olive oil on the salad, which is the first thing that you do as an Italian. This is the first thing that you do with the salad, but apparently you do as well as an astronaut. So you see, the thing about food is the complexity of the experience. It's not just nourishment. It is texture. It is flavor. But we heard about it is also how you eat. Astronauts apparently don't, as Colonello Villadei said, they don't have a very easy way of consuming food. It was worse before, because in the first missions, they would have to suck these blended food from tubes. And astronauts said that despite the fact that it was like baby food, which of course is not, everyone knows that baby food is not appetizing for an adult. But the thing that they disliked the most was not being able to see the food that they were eating. So we have to think about food on many levels. We have to think about food from a nutritional point of view, first of all, as a countermeasure, but we need to think about everything else. We need to think about touch, we need to think about taste, we need to think about the conviviality, and we need to think about the experience, the tactical experience of the person that is consuming this food. And I think this is a good introduction to our last course. Last course.
That is actually coffee and chocolate. And actually Villadei, but also Georgia introduced the need of cutting-edge technologies, and this is what Altec Lavazza in combination with Argotec and ASI installed actually the first ISS espresso on the ISS in 2015, and thanks to Samantha Cristoforetti, that actually had her first espresso on in the space during her mission, during the mission Futura. No, Minerva, sorry. And Futura. Okay. And also, I mean, espresso, it's something that is quite important for an Italian at the end of the meal, but also something that is quite that it's increase your morale, that makes you very happy, is chocolate. That also it's good, but it's also have some benefit on the body, because it's full of polyphenol, that is an antioxidant, is a it contains also caffeine that help to keep you concentrated. And when you mix together coffee and chocolate, actually you can make one of the most other tiramisu in the world, the tiramisu. And tiramisu was actually part of the bonus food of Parmitano, and a part of the benefit of the chocolate and coffee as a big source of calcium, because the mascarpone cheese. And but obviously, I think you cannot exaggerate because it has a lot of calories. So, and Marta, would you like?
I guess it's not like we know a little bit of sweet is not a problem in the context of a balanced diet. So it's part of this like the hedonistic side of food. As I said. It is, we need to approach food production from all points of view. And again, like, as I said, we need to think about the technologies that we need to develop to improve the experience of astronauts and probably in the near future of space tourists to eat in space. I don't know if our guests want to add anything.
No, it's okay.
For me, it's okay.
Okay.
Okay. So with the
no.
Okay.
Slide. So of course, at ASI, we talk about today about the heritage of the Italian cuisine for space exploration. But at ASI, we're always looking to innovate and to, of course, contribute to the future of food production for space exploration. Earlier this year, we organized this national symposium on food production. It was very interesting. We welcome the entire scientific and technological community in ASI. And soon we hope to fund many projects on the development of new technologies for food production in space. And with this, I don't know if there are any. First of all, thank you very much for your attention. Yes. Ci sono domande?
Sì.
And I don't know if there are any questions. Come facciamo con gli...
Sì, you can come close.
If you want to... Okay.
Okay. As you know, every single grams has a cost. So it means a huge payload if you send fresh or already liquid products. So freeze-dried now is the answer, because you will save a lot of money in weight, keeping costs low, and letting astronauts eat a good product with a fast rehydration. The International Space Agency gives us a specific weight, net weight and gross weight. So in creating food, in creating a menu, we are very, very careful about this kind of specific.
I actually don't know. That's a very good question. I guess somebody will have to eat it, or otherwise, once it expires, it gets thrown away.
Consider that the freeze-dried food, in our case, has a minimum shelf life of 2 years.
And as Vilade said, your taste changes. So it might be that what you don't like maybe the next astronaut is gonna like, and it's gonna be their favorite food.
Hello, one question again related to long-term storage of food. The question is, okay, in case of a long duration mission, so we clearly have to define ways to keep food not only long time, but also define the quality of the food at the end. Assuming that the food expires, what are the measures to control whether there is still, is still eatable and whether there are contamination, for example? Do you have anything in mind?
Okay, so the control of contamination is definitely an issue. I don't think that anyone would risk the health of an astronaut with expired food. We've seen on the Apollo, I think it was spreadable tuna that they had, they didn't finish, and they asked ground control whether to eat it the next day or not, and ground control said no. They already eaten it because they were hungry, but I think the health of the astronaut is far more important than wasting some food, because the success of the mission depends on the health of the astronaut. And I always like to say the success of the mission is bringing the astronauts alive back home. So you don't have an hospital, you don't have any, of course you have a crew, but if anything happens and the mission fails, you risk your life for some expired food. So yeah, definitely it is important to control contamination, because contamination can happen on food that is not expired, we all know that, but it's definitely, once it's expired, I don't think it's worth the risk. It's always a risk assessment, isn't it? I don't know if there's any questions online.
Yes, we have a question on what are the is it possible to have gelato in space?
Maybe a freeze-dried one, adding ice at the water.
Yeah, I'm not sure. The thing is, it would be amazing, I think, to have gelato in space. Unfortunately, Colonel Villadez is not with us anymore to tell us about that. But yeah, I think the cold storage is a very it's a very rare commodity on the ISS. And this is true for even normal standard food, even freeze-dried food and thermostabilized food. The shelf life is prolonged in cold storage, but of course we can't afford to have cold storage for all of this food. And probably we're gonna stick to tiramisu, which is, I guess, a good compromise.
Yes, I think we have also a question for Georgia. Are you conducting research into cultivating plants under conditions such as 1/6 gravity in preparation for future plant cultivation in space or other planet?
Okay, at the moment we are now testing to cultivate directly using in situ resources of the moon, so using regolith, and controlling the entire process in terms of contamination, temperature, humidity, light, and so on, and nutrients. We have not simulated the absence of gravity, but there are a lot of scientific research and paper who told how a plant evolves under microgravity conditions. So for us, the important was in this moment is to demonstrate that we can use in situ resources without bringing from Earth the substrate to cultivate on the moon.
Okay, thank you very much. And probably we have time for another question. From all the food that you have available, do you have the ability to pick up what you want to eat, or do you have any limited choice? This is, I think it was for...
that would probably be for...
yes,
but they do, all astronauts have a choice, because as we said, it's important to make the astronauts eat what they want, and from a psychological point of view, comfort food, of course, changes depending on the culture. We talked about Italian food, which of course remind us of a home. if we are Italian, but of course you might want something that belongs to your cultural heritage. And this is something, again, that makes astronauts come together and it stimulates conviviality, because it's nice if everyone brings their food from their own country, then we can come together and share. We have a...
Just a quick question that just came to my mind for Antonio, I think maybe. It's, okay, if we are at home and we eat something that is not smelling good or, you know, has a strong smell, then you open the window and somehow it's fine. But if you live in a space station for a while, I believe you can't open the window. So I was just wondering, is there any smell or you know, other sense requirements when it comes to the development of specific food? You were talking about the olive pate or something that at the end they open and somehow can spread in the environment, which is a very close environment, some smell that might not be liked. Yeah. Thank you.
That's another reason we avoid liquid food, because also during the trip for the Earth to the ISS today and to lunar bases tomorrow, the liquid food can fermentate. At the same time, the freeze-dried food help us to keep all these aspects, including smell, under control. With the right adding of water, we can avoid this kind of issue, keeping flavor, keeping the smell, and keeping also the color of the single freeze-dried ingredients. Furthermore, we carefully select every single ingredient, doing counter-analysis, because as you know, we don't freeze-dry the single ingredients, but we have several suppliers from Italy and Europe. And we carefully select them in order to have on the Earth and in the space too a perfect product.
And Franco Malerba said that actually when during his mission, there was one of his colleagues that had goulash, and the smell was lingering for many days. So unfortunately, it's not always possible to have not smelly food. I think our time is up. I would like to thank all our guests. And all of you for coming to this GNF, and I wish you a very good AAC.
but it's all exciting. Yeah. Oh, I have my hat, my class.
Yes.
I need to get careful.
Hello? Test. Test. Good. Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's panel discussion on driving innovation through collaboration, public-private partnerships in space. My name is Sarwat Nasser, and I'm the space editor at The National. It's an absolute pleasure to moderate this discussion where we'll delve into how public and private sectors can work together to drive innovation, enhance workforce development, and tackle the challenges that the space economy faces today. Public and private partnerships have been the cornerstone of space exploration for decades, helping to advance technology, unlock commercial opportunities, and enable humanity to reach further than ever before. Our esteemed panelists here today bring unique perspectives from government, private sector, and space economy expertise. We're fortunate to hear from them on how collaboration is shaping the future of space exploration. Let me introduce our panelists. Salim Batsi Al-Khabaisi, the Director General of the UAE Space Agency.
Thank you.
Mario Grotz, the Chairman of the Board at the Luxembourg Space Agency. Mike Gold, the Chief Growth Officer at Redwire Space. And Harvey Duray, the President and CEO of Tails Alenia. Thank you for joining us today, and let's get started with the questions. So I think the first question goes to the Director General of the UAE Space Agency. We're wondering, how does the UAE pave the way for future public and private collaborations in space exploration, and how does it contribute to education and the workforce development?
Thank you very much, Sarwat. It's really a pleasure being here with esteemed panels. The formation, the mandate of the UAE Space Agency is actually falls into two areas. The biggest one being investing in human capital. And that's what was, recognized from the get-go. We need to be active internationally and do collaboration projects, programs. This led the way for the rollout of the Emirates mission to explore Mars, the Hope probe. That was done in collaboration between government entities, local government entities, and some of the work from the private sector as well. But the undermining goal was still there in developing some of our new engineers, scientists from the get-go in a program that spanned over many years. After that, we've tried another area of collaboration and trying to do, partnerships. And this partnership, extends overall the globe, many MOUs with different space agencies or research centers to serve the main goals that we had in mind. We realized that it's a mutual benefit kind of agreement. So we find these areas and explore it for the benefit of both sides. Resulted in collaboration with JAXA, for instance, in many of the areas to launch the Hope probe itself. Also areas in developing some of the work that we are currently doing in getting best practices to roll out here in the UAE space sector. Resulted in many programs. I'm glad to share that today in the UAE Space Pavilion, we have a number of companies that are part of our space economic zones that we've rolled out early on based on some of the experience and exchanges we had with our international collaboration, especially the gentleman next to me, and he will talk to you about it, inshallah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mr. Al-Khabaisi. My next question for Mr. Grotz. What strategies have you employed to ensure that innovations from your public-private partnerships reach the commercial market? And what can be applied to future missions?
Yes, thank you. It works. Yes. Yeah, first of all, I'm also honored to be among this panel, and it's really a pleasure to be here again and to discuss about these topics. I think Luxembourg was one of the first countries which was really focusing on commercial space already in the 80s, when nobody talked about space and commercial space. We invested in a space company which today is still one of the leading telecommunication companies, SES. Over all the years, we really developed the company, and we developed instruments in order to support companies not only to do research in Luxembourg, of course that's a very important element, but we also need to take the companies from TRL level 6 to TRL level 7, 8 and 9, so really to bring them to commercialization, and that is in the space area quite a job where you need which takes a lot of time. So it's really important that you develop the right instruments, and I'll just give you some examples of instruments which we developed for the Luxembourg ecosystem. The first is that when you develop intellectual property, this is not directly meaning that you are able to commercialize. So what we launched is an international contest to use an intellectual property and to develop companies with this. And I'm insisting on the international aspects of this. It's very important that we look abroad and that we attract the best talents through this type of context to Luxembourg. And then, of course, we are not offering only some financial support, but we're also offering an accelerator program which really helps the company at least to develop the first prototype. And somehow we are making them ready for the venture capital markets. That's where the government really has to intervene. When they're ready for the venture capital market, then we take a different position. We are there partnering with venture capital. We are investing in some of these venture capital companies who are focusing on space. And in the companies which set up activities in Luxembourg, we are even co-investing also alongside with these venture capital funds in Luxembourg-based entities. And we are doing this on the same terms and conditions than the venture capital does. So in fact, the venture capital does all the due diligence on the companies. And we are a follower investor, and we take the same positions, and we also take the same responsibilities then on the company. But in fact, the venture capital is also representing us on the board of the companies. A state is not always the best investor, the best entrepreneur, so we really should use the competencies which are on the market. So there are different initiatives, and with this, we already have invested in quite many companies, and some doing really well in that sense.
Yeah, I think that's a good model that countries can follow. Congrats on that. Before we jump into the perspectives of the private sector, I think we might have a QR code up there that you can type in questions on Slido, and then I can read them here and take them at the end of this, the Q&A, the panel session. So Mr. Derry, how do you manage the alignment of goals and expectations between the public and private partners in your space initiatives?
So first, I would like to thank you for inviting me to this panel. As you said, I'm in charge of a company called Thales Enya Space, which basically covers all space elements or space assets apart from launchers. And in our domain, so this covers satellites, but space infrastructure in general. We see and we acknowledge a shift of paradigm, moving from, let's say, the traditional business models to service-based business models that, and therefore towards PPP, and which represents for us, in fact, an interesting area of growth that we tackle with numerous programs and associated investment. When looking into this domain, basically what we see is that, as a matter of fact, in order for this to work, it's very important to have a very strong alignment between public and private on what will be the, let's say, keys for success of the business plan for that PPP. And in order to reach this common view and common alignment, a number of topics have to be put on the table, and we need to have, let's say, a common view. on topics such as risk sharing. How is the risk going to be shared between the industry or the private and the public? And basically on this kind of programs, I mean, all programs in space have always, let's say, a technological challenge. So how do you manage the technological risk? How do you manage the development and program risk, which is also something that always happens? And finally, how do you manage the potential market risk? And here, let's say the share of responsibility has to be clearly assigned between public and private. When we are talking about very low-level technologies, there is an expectation of having part of this risk carried by the, let's say, by the institutions. Usually, we carry the development risk, which is something that is really in our DNA. And for everything that is related to the market risk, it's important to have with our customer, let's say, a common view, and to have from the public side a real anchor program that will give us certain visibility on the business case, and that will help us to close the business case. So that's one important element. The second important element is also to develop a local space ecosystem, technology and competencies that can support the commercial initiative. So fund the low TRL solution, support growth and internationalization of the companies, because in most of the cases, those companies will not be able to only, let's say, close their business case on one program, but they need the internationalization and in general support the export for all the stakeholders. In Thales Alenia Space, we have a good success, I mean an Italian success that I can refer to. We have created 20 years ago with the Italian Space Agency a joint venture called Altec that has been active for now, as I said, more than 20 years in the domains of ISS operation support, logistics, training, scientific data storage, analysis and distribution. And this partnership is really working very well, and is now probably going to be expanded to lunar activities.
Great, thank you. Mr. Gold, how do public-private partnerships in your space sector contribute to creating a competitive and innovative commercial market? I'm sure you have a lot to say on that. That's a big market in the US.
So let me first say, I got an award earlier today.
Yes.
But the greatest award is being with these panelists up here. That is fantastic to be with the most innovative, reliable commercial geotelecommunications company in the world, with Thales, and with UAE and Luxembourg, two of the most forward-leaning, commercially minded space agencies in the world. That when we were writing the Commercial Space Launch Amendments Act of 2015, I was using policies from UAE and from Luxembourg to shame the US into doing the right thing. That these two countries, they embraced commercial space before it was cool, and I think have gained dividends from it. For example, with Luxembourg, iSpace Europe is hopefully going to land on the moon in the not too distant future. And when I was at NASA, we executed an agreement, first time ever, for the agency to purchase lunar regolith from a commercial company. We always thought it would be more of a policy exercise. I am a recovering attorney, so I believe in precedent. We're trying to set a precedent. But because of the public-private partnerships, what was going to be policy may become reality, hopefully early next year. In the meantime, at UAE, I can't applaud enough how Emirates has stepped up and is providing the airlock now for the gateway. But not only is Emirates, and I certainly don't mean to speak for Emirates here, but let me say, I think it's a wonderful example of not only a vital project for Artemis, but the knowledge transfer. The fact that Emirates is focused on learning from it so that it not only gains a gateway, but has a new cadre of engineers, of workforce that can support a growing and dynamic ecosystem. That is the key. And that's what's so exciting about the new public-private partnerships. It's not enough when a government purchases a system from the private sector or executes a contract to support a mission, but now we're also asking the question, what does it do for commercialization? How does that purchase help me build people, build certainty, build knowledge, in my growing aerospace sector. And that's a sea change, paradigm shift in the way that we used to think of things. How many people saw the amazing SpaceX landing with chopsticks? Incredible.
Yeah.
Brought to you by public-private partnerships. That if it wasn't for the PPPs, Elon Musk himself has been quite clear, SpaceX wouldn't exist. This entire golden age of commercial space that we're experiencing is because of public-private partnerships. At Redwire, we printed the first human meniscus in space. Who wants a meniscus? Who could use a meniscus? I know I could. It was Sultan Al Nayeli who helped us do that on the ISS. So thank you again to the UAE. We recently printed live cardiovascular tissue and then brought it back, still live, from the ISS this year. That will help us to solve heart disease. We're developing new pharmaceuticals from microgravity seed crystals that could help with diabetes, cancer, AIDS, all sorts of treatments. It's an amazing future that has been unlocked by public-private partnerships. So I hope that we have learned from the benefits and that we in America and the private sector and the government and then around the world continue to lean in to the power, the potential, and the innovation that PPP will bring all of us.
Great. Yeah, good to hear the benefits that public-private partnerships is bringing the industry. But now let's dive into the challenges as well. Getting back to Mr. El-Kubaisi on some of the challenges, like what changes are needed to better facilitate collaboration and innovation? I'll let you finish your water first.
Thank you. Well, challenges, there are a lot of challenges to start with, but it doesn't help to focus on challenges. We have a mindset of moving forward, and we try to turn these challenges into opportunities for collaboration, again, fostering partnership. And with that, we try to push through these challenges. And I'll give a small example on one of the programs that we have in trying to give back to the region and try to help out better, the space sector in general in the region with the formation of the Arabic Space Cooperation Group. That group by itself was meant to help out each other in getting more space activities, industries, sciences, technologies developed in each of the country members of the group. And it was with the government sought out that for this to work out, we have to again put a platform for this group to work on. As we did for the Hope probe and the Emirates mission to explore Mars, again, and funding was secured to develop a small Earth observation satellite, then can be the participant of which from the Arab group members. And we capitalize on all the students from these countries who are in the UAE to partake in this program. Depending on the phase that they are in, now it's currently in the development phase. The CDR has been passed successfully a couple of months ago, and will start ramping up and actually the manufacturing, putting together, assembly, testing, and integration activities will soon commence. But that doesn't stop there. It goes beyond that. The opportunity comes also with the downstream activities. Data is available for all the country members to also, again, try to develop their capabilities in space analytics. To address this, our first private-public partnership that we've done was with the, formerly Bayanat company that you might know now was Space 42. We've developed a platform for specifically that. It's a way for us to encourage developing the sector, the small startups that we have that are more focused on the downstream, to have access for space data, which usually is the challenging part for startup companies, and to deliver their smarts in applications that they can host again on the same platform in a marketplace, where our partners who access to the platform can buy readily available or try to contact some of the companies who are partnered up to develop certain areas. This same platform can be used for collaboration internationally, and we're going to use it for the 813 satellite that we're developing in the UAE for the Arabic Cooperation Group to disseminate the data, to host most of the activities for space analytics, to address important things, disaster, and crisis management. We all know some of the past years the area has been devastated with the floods, earthquakes, and this is a platform that we can see a valuable addition in the whole grand scheme of things in trying to address this, besides agriculture, monitoring, environmental monitoring as well.
That's great. No, I'm looking forward to that satellite launch. I've been covering that extensively.
I know.
Mr. Grotz, how do you, what are the key factors for creating a successful ecosystem that fosters innovation and collaboration in the space sector?
Yes, I think it all starts with the political commitment. It is very important that you have a long-term vision and a long-term commitment also to space. Space definitely needs time in order to develop technology and to commercialize the technology. So you need to have a government which is committed to space and which also is investing money in the different programs, but also on the startups. And I think Luxembourg is a good example how to do this. We started this in the 80s. We continually supported the companies, and we today are a large contributor to ESA programs, but we also have our national programs. So this commitment is extremely important. Then, of course, you need to build the ecosystem, and you have to develop R&D activities. You have to strengthen the research activities at university and at the space agencies. You also need to make sure that you have the regulatory framework in place. It's extremely important, especially when it comes to the new space area, that you give legal certainty legal security to the companies. So that is of utmost importance. And the UAE and Luxembourg were the countries who was first movers in that area. And we see today that this is extremely important for the companies. And at the end, maybe last point on which Luxembourg is today also working, and I'm joining my colleague from the UAE Space Agency, is also gets more and more important to put all the data at the disposal of the companies. There is a lot of data, be it Copernicus data, but also a lot of data from private companies. And the idea in Luxembourg, at least, is today that we really need to create a data space, where we get all the companies access to the space data so that they can use this data by free or by paying for it. It depends, of course, on the source of the data, but then by also merging this data with terrestrial data and develop new activities based on artificial intelligence or other technologies. So that is today one of our main concerns, is really also to position Luxembourg as one of the European hubs where you can get access to the data which is publicly available, to the data from the private companies, but then also to the data from European agencies. But there also, we at the end have definitely to collaborate internationally, so that it will also in the future be possible to exchange data between different regions of the world. And that is joining a little bit what you just mentioned on the UAE side.
Thank you. Mr. Derry, from the perspective of the private sector, what do you think the primary challenges faces public and private partnerships, and how do you think they're being addressed?
So there are indeed many challenges, but I believe that all these challenges can be faced. Three keywords or three very key elements to meet these challenges. First, we need clarity. You need also anticipation, and third, long-term planning. Let me start with very first, that might be obvious point, but that we should always think about. First, you need the public buy-in, because at the end of the day, these programs are funded by, let's say, by taxpayers, and therefore you need those taxpayers to agree and adhere to these programs. And it's therefore quite important to explain what is the return for the public, what is the interest of putting that public money into those programs. As you said, I mean, we have many very exciting programs in front of us. You talked about Artemis and indeed the airlock program in UAE, but other examples in Europe, we are talking about the future IRIS² constellation for let's say global connectivity. All those programs are very interesting programs, but once again, they rely partly on public money. And therefore, I think it's quite important to explain what does it provide to each and every citizen. This is something, by the way, that we do quite a lot within Thales Alenia Space in general, talking about the public sector. We have a motto, we say space for life, basically what space can provide to humankind. And I think it's quite important to always make the link for the public between those programs and what it provides to the general public. Apart from that, and I think it was said before, having a very clear governance and contractual commitment on both sides is very important for all stakeholders. Those programs are complex with a number of cases, lots of stakeholders, and therefore having a very clear governance will help in executing them, in launching and executing those programs. I talked about the risk aspects before. The other element is also the adequate sizing and timing of public funding, which here also requires, in a number of cases, anticipation, especially for institutions that have long or complex appropriation cycles, or if the budget has short-term horizons. A number of these projects can encompass long periods, and therefore, let's say, having some guarantee that the budgets are going to be available let's say, during the entire period of the program is important, which can be done in some cases through regulation. Finally, those programs are usually complex and are very sensitive to timing, because there is always, from the private standpoint, let's say, a return on investment element, and therefore being on time is very important. So for a flawless execution, it's quite important that let's say, the industrial players that have been selected for those programs can demonstrate, I mean, a true experience and a true, let's say, complementarity in the different elements of the program that will have to be completed. So choosing the right industrial partners is also a key for success.
Thank you. And I think my last question for Mr. Gold, because we're running out of time. How can SMEs optimize collaboration mechanisms with larger public agencies to enhance innovation in the space sector?
So they need to embrace the international aspects of the space community. One of the great things with PPP, public-private partnerships, is that we've seen things become more fixed price, and we've seen them become more international. A fundamental principle of the COTS and CRS program at NASA was that you could involve international content. Luxembourg has embraced being a global entity. UAE, in the early days of DubaiSat-1, DubaiSat-2, Korea was assisting the launch of Hope, done by MHI. Yeah. And Thales itself, composed of France and Italy. Bringing these countries, bringing international cooperation together, to me, is a vital part of the public-private partnerships, having the freedom to proceed globally to take the best of what is being offered. And SMEs, I think, also need to warn against the difficulties and challenges of export control. Second only to gravity, the ITAR has prevented more good space programs from launching than anything else. And one of the reasons they listed that I got an award this morning was, and you see how many times I'm fitting that in, was that I spent the first part of my career fighting for export control reform. And we need to make sure that export control reflects reality and embraces the international reality of the space age. Because if we don't do that, countries that I think focus on pure domestic will fall behind, and those that embrace international cooperation will be not only the economic but the national security leaders of the future. So no better location or venue than to say stay international. And finally, I'll say the SMEs who are working both sides of the aisle, you may have heard, it's gotten a little bit of press, we have an election coming up in the United States. And I hope that regardless of the results, we double down on public-private partnerships. We shouldn't take our progress for granted. Republican or Democrat, we need to continue to embrace the policy and the PPP paradigm that has brought about the second golden age of space.
Thank you. That's a good tip to follow. I think we have time for maybe one question. And I think to anyone, well, it's addressed to Mr. Kobesi. So if, from your perspective, having completed the Mars mission and now pursuing the mission to the asteroid belt, what are some of the most challenging aspects of knowledge transfer, and what aspects have been most successful?
Well, that's a great question. Just to tell you, we're trying to double down on the successes that we've done with EMM and our international partners and see where we can push the envelope, especially on capacity building, transfer of technology, and local participation in the program. So if we put kind of a tally, we had a few companies, not more than your hand, fingers on your hand, participated, local companies in the development of some part in the HOPE probe. Today, we're looking for that to be at least double. We're looking at the participation of even SMEs to partake in some of the area. We have, part of the mission is to develop a lander, which will be the last stage on Justicia, the last asteroid that will be visiting. This will be developed totally into its totality in country. So we're pushing the envelope on what's expectation we want to see our partners in the program in country, and also to do the job for us. Don't wait for us to do international collaboration. Go yourself, forge new relationships. As my colleagues have emphasized, as an agency, we are doubling down on international collaboration. And we want to see that not by us only as an agency, but everybody in the space sector do it as well. And that's how I think we can do better this time around. We have greater participation from academia in the new project. We've announced New York University and Abu Dhabi being our science partner, and many of that as well coming up, inshallah, to the future as well.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think that's all the time we have today. Yeah, we've gone over time. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us today here in the panel, and looking forward to what's next for all of you.
Thank you. Thank you. Great job.
Thank you.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here for these GNF sessions. I would like now to introduce the GNF, the institutional investor gap in space and how to close it. And I would like to give the word to the moderator, Carissa Christensen, the CEO of Bryce Tech.
Thank you so much.
The floor is yours.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you all for being here late in the day in this very comfortably warm room for a conversation I think will be very interesting. So we in the space community have gone through a bit of a transformation in the last decade. We've seen quite a lot of venture investment, and many organizations across the ecosystem are grappling with the question of what next in terms of growth. And certainly one step in that growth path is institutional investment at a level to really support scaling. So the hypothesis of this panel is that we have a bit of an institutional investor gap, that we are not seeing private equity, we're not seeing sovereign wealth funds, we're not seeing the pension fund type investors targeting space at the level we might like. That's the hypothesis, and we have exactly, I think, the right panel to explore that hypothesis and consider whether it's right, whether it's wrong, and what we can do in response. So our panelists from the end are Mike French. Mike is the founder of Space Policy Group. Mike consults across the investment community and also has had a few other jobs, including Chief of Staff at NASA and working in the White House. We have Mr. Jae Kim, who is the CEO of Boryung, which is a Korea-based health investment firm that has made a major commitment to space. We have Dr. Agnieszka Lukaszek, who is well known to many of you as a senior leader at Planet, who is now running high altitude consulting and who has also been operating in the South and Central America region for the last several years, and so I think brings us some useful insights there. And Mr. Alessandro Izzo, Director, European Investment Bank, which is, of course, seeking to strengthen and enhance the investment landscape in Europe. So with that, I will jump right into our questions, and then hopefully we can also take some audience questions to really make this as conversational as possible. And so the first question I want to start with is, I alluded to this, but let's set the stage a little bit. We have been through a transformation in the space ecosystem in terms of investment. Agnieszka, you've spent a good portion of your career in recent years at a company created through that venture wave. Can you talk a little bit about where we are now?
Absolutely. Thank you, Carissa, and thank you for the invitation. Apologies for my voice. Probably by the end of the week, I will not be saying anything anymore. But it is really exciting period to be in, indeed. I entered the space sector in 2006, and since then, I mean, we are in a space renaissance that is clear. Companies like SpaceX, Planet, Spire, ISI were created, and mainly through venture capital money, and doing amazing things, right? Something that we couldn't even imagine would be happening before. I mean, I'm sure you all saw what happened with this little thing SpaceX did yesterday, which was extremely impressive. So we are part of something larger. It's not just about governments. It's not just about the traditional defense contractors. It's about those who also want to make a difference and be impactful. And investors see it as a potential. And I think that's very exciting.
So we've had this infusion of, depending on whose number you pay attention to, I'm going to quote the number that my company came up with, which is more than $60 billion of venture capital and 500 to 600 new firms around the world, predominantly in the U.S. and in other nations as well. As those companies grow, as they take that investment, establish capabilities, seek to grow, they're looking for customers. And before we get into the question of investment, let's talk a little bit about the market and where those customers, where that growth seems to be coming from, to frame the environment investors are looking at. So Alessandra, do you want to talk a little bit about where you see the market at the moment?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me to join the panel. I think that, just to resonate a bit the words of Agnieszka, we've seen a fantastic change of paradigm globally, but also in Europe in the last 10, 15 years. And with, let's say, commercialization of space, we've seen the opening of a completely new sort of universe of investors on one hand, and of potential users of space technology and infrastructure. Now, just to go straight to your question, today the main use and the main sort of like from an investment viewpoint as well, potential takeout of these technologies follows a bit also general macroeconomic and political trends. So we've seen a bit of a reverse between downstream and upstream sort of the technologies and investments because of on one hand macroeconomic and fundraising sort of situation changing for companies that traditionally were approaching more commercial markets. So in that space we've seen a bit of reduction of traction and activities, whereas for political and also long-term sort of strategic investment planning decisions, we've seen in the upstream space a bit of more activity. And this is actually also from a European perspective, certified by, if you see the activity of VCs in the two segments, that quite paradoxically, or would you say paradoxically, but quite intuitively with the statement I just made, in 2023 reversed a bit the exposure to upstream and downstreams, whilst until 2020 the majority of investments were in the downstream space. Now actually the curve has turned for the reason I just said.
So downstream space, satellite services, targeting end users, upstream more to the manufacturing, hardware side?
Launchers, all the in-orbit services, and also would say part of the Earth observation.
With significant government involvement in that shift as a customer?
Yes, definitely. Mostly, I would say, in giving the strategic direction, so with a part of support in terms of policy and also revenues. But the figures I was mentioning are really, private VC money flowing into Europe. So, you see where actually private money is following public money, and between parentheses, that's also the investment thesis of my institution. We're a public bank. We're there to invest directly into equity and venture debt in innovative startups, including in space ones, but with a clear signaling, goal, which is that of like addressing and understanding where the market gaps are, what are the technology solutions that need to be pursued, and partnering also with public and private financiers.
So, Jay, you have clearly a view about where the market is going, what is going to be significant, and your company has significantly committed to reflect that view. So from the perspective of your investment, also more broadly, again, where do you see the market going? That's kind of creating the context for a larger investment.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me at the panel. And if you talk about the flow of the capital into this industry, I think everyone knows that most of the capital that were supporting the companies were coming from governments. And we are yet to, we talk about VCs, but we are yet to see the big names of the VCs from Silicon Valley, so to speak. We are yet to see a major investment from firms like Sequoia or Andreessen Horowitz. The money's not coming in from them yet. So you also mentioned about who are the customers for utilizing the infrastructures that the space companies are building. It's early stage venture or startups that are mostly funded by government grants or government support, so to speak.
So I was just going to interject very quickly. I think it's really interesting. Jay, I think you're talking about what we'll call the in-space activities market.
Yes.
Commercial human spaceflight, on-orbit pharmaceutical development, and that has been such a tiny proportion of the venture investment, exactly as you point out.
Yes.
Whereas we have seen Andreessen Horowitz and we have seen Sequoia on the satellite side.
Right.
So yes, okay. So just to clarify.
That. Yeah, thank you for
very
correcting that.
interesting.
So I'm speaking from the area that I know, so to speak. Yeah. So that has been the case, and there is a company like us where we make venture investments, as well as we also write big checks, investments such as the investment that we made into Axiom. And I don't think we will be the last one who will be doing so. If there's a company who sees the value of utilizing the benefits of microgravity or environment in space, I'm sure that there will be more companies jumping in and trying to innovate. And it's personally, I'm starting to feel that this new part of space are gaining attentions and interest from a very large, renowned Silicon Valley venture capitals. So I think that has been a change in a couple of years.
Interesting. So, Mike, I know you have opinions on the market and where it's going. And can you talk a little bit about where growth is likely to happen, where maybe there's going to be some challenges? Again, setting the stage for how investors are going to view the market going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I think when we look at the space economy, it is about connectivity. Right, a huge portion of the space economy for decades, the commercial space economy has been about satellite services. Right, increasingly you're seeing that wedge transform from video to broadband. Right, and so I think there's it is clear that will continue, and then we'll continue to see that growth there. I think you see a pretty steady set of activity across the launch market, across manufacturing. Right, fairly stable, and the real growth then comes in. Can that connectivity market expand well beyond what TV-based services could do? The other area where I think there's a potential for quite a bit of growth, but there's been a lot of, I think, fits and starts in unlocking it, is how do we turn Earth observation data into the right, how do we get that into the right customer channel? Right, I think that we've had, Neska, your former employer, we've had a lot of space companies that are trying to turn that data into an analytical tool. And I think where we're seeing some really interesting stuff is where you're having non-space companies, industrial goods companies, other companies adding space data into the existing data they already use. And to me, that's somewhere in there, if you mix that connectivity with Earth observation data, to me, that's where you potentially see this possible step change in a market jump.
Okay, so we've talked about essentially 4 general areas. We've talked about satellite services and telecommunications, pretty mature, active market undergoing a transformation. We've talked about remote sensing, where we've seen many companies start following venture investment, where the investment thesis was we're going to be able to serve new sectors of the economy by providing them a new type of information, and those companies are still working to realize that thesis. I think we would all agree. We've talked about the in-space activities, human spaceflight, and platforms, and exploration and research and pharmaceutical development and other product development, where there's interest, there's certainly some investment by companies like Boryung and into companies like Axiom. There's still a very substantial government role there. And then we've talked about sort of the upstream piece, which is being activated by every one of those markets in different ways, as well as, I would assert, national security considerations as well. Okay, so that's where we're at. Now, how do they grow? Where does the capital come for those sectors to go to the next level? And sort of, the kind of simplistic model is that's either more government money or private equity money. So it's not quite as simple a venture versus private equity. There's a little bit of a continuum there. Mike, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you talked about $60 billion over the last 2 decades going to space. If you look at that investment, about 70% of that has been venture capital. Private equity has been about 5%. Then you got about 10% in IPOs and debt and acquisition type spending, right? So that kind of makes sense though, right? I mean, what is venture doing? It's putting its money into high risk for potentially high returns, right? So for many of these space sectors, it makes a lot of sense that that's where that money is. So when we look at that private equity money, I guess I'll be, I'm not sure if it's contrarian or optimistic. I guess I'll be optimistic, right? I actually
contrarian would be on brand, but you know, go ahead for optimistic.
I'm going to be the Danny Rojas of space investment. And so when you look at where private equity money is going, right? There's sort of 2 channels where you see it. The first is sort of that classic private equity model where they're saying, with our dollars, we think we can do something different with perhaps combining a couple companies or splitting up a company, or we think that we can put different management in there to gain potential, right? Sort of the classic private equity model. You're seeing that in space, right? We've actually seen some really interesting deals recently, right? You're seeing that with OHB and KKR. You saw that with Maxar and Advent. We're hearing about Eutelsat and its ground stations now. So you're seeing those kind of classic private equity type actions. But the other thing you're seeing that I think is kind of interesting in space, you're seeing PE firms act like venture capital firms. And part of that is because we're seeing these really big rounds. I think a lot of people thought we were done with these super, 100 million plus rounds, and here we are. We just saw 2 or 3 of them. And in those big rounds, you're seeing private equity firms acting as essentially venture capital partners in those rounds, right? And so there's almost like a different model coming in play with some of these recent large numbers.
So, so your view is largely looking at the U.S. market. There is private equity engagement. It's often of a different flavor than maybe what we think of as the conventional model. So let's kind of maybe talk through. I'm going to speculate about the level of activity and go in that order. So Alessandro, I think Europe is next on this panel in terms of, are you seeing companies get the financing they need to grow to that next level? Are you seeing the putting companies together to create a platform or to create a new capability? Or are you seeing companies struggle and worry about going out of business? Because I want to come back to that.
Well, what we can see in Europe, I think it's a paradigm which is reflective a bit of in general, the growth stage of many European tech champions. So, we're quite good at the first phase of research, of spin out, early stage seeding and early stage investment. There is enough of, public-private money, some institution like us, the European Innovation Council, Commission. So we kind of like grow company to, let's say, the Series B, C stage. Then that's the big, question mark. That's where we actually have, some of the companies have to look at, the other side of the Atlantic to grow. There isn't the depth of the capital market. And also, whilst we've seen more venture capital and some private equity activity in Europe, we actually do not have the depth of big, deep pocket funds that are capable of funding these mega rounds. There are initiatives that are there to develop the whole ecosystem of 1 billion plus funds. The European Tech Champion Initiative, which is sponsored by a few member states and the European Investment Fund and the EIB, is actually there to create with a 5 billion sort of initial endowment, investing as LP in funds that have raised 1 billion more, with some verticals dedicated to deep tech and space. So there is, I'd say, an attempt to kind of like develop that ecosystem. But we need to be conscious of the fact that today, unfortunately, we're still a bit behind some other markets. Now, this said, where we've seen also some activity is in, if you want, consolidation and, I wouldn't say the listing, but, bringing back private some of the companies that went public in the US with SPAC structures. And that's where some private money is flowing into the sector. And I think that's where we will see it for the next couple of years.
So I'm going to press on that a little bit because you framed this largely as we need to build the capital base, build the investment ecosystem, bring the companies along. So those are, so that is a very positive thing from the point of view of government interest in space companies. But it also is indicative of some of the challenges those companies are having. There are certainly industries that don't need that kind of fostering and support. What makes, in your view, why does space need that? Is it because it's so capital intensive? Is it because of the timelines? Is it because...
It's a combination of these things. I mean, I think with Europe being a little bit behind the US in terms of development of specialist sort of VC and PE investors, there is a risk aversion to high technology risk combined with demand and market risk and long, if you want, payback times of the investment. All these actually push private money, especially in the venture capital and private equity space, in other subsectors other than space. But, to be optimistic, in fact, actually, in the last 2 years, there has been a bit of, in the general sort of like reduction a bit of private money flow into the VC and PE space in Europe. In the deep tech subsector, space has been the one that has remained the most resilient, actually has increased this percentage. So it's still smaller compared to the money that's flowing generally to deep tech, but this is, I think, quite significant and indicative of the fact that there is a growing sort of awareness of the fact that probably the risk proposition is not so disaligned to other high-risk sector in the deep tech space, that there are some good commercial uses and good co-investors that can actually lead rounds or signal the sort of like the validity of the technological and business proposition. And that is a mounting political support. I mean, especially in European space today, everything which has to do with security, defense, space, enabling technologies is looked at with a renowned sort of like interest and public support in terms of regulation, policy, and also money.
I think that the shifting posture of France and of Germany, to a lesser extent the UK, around national security and space and national security has had such an impact on that community and that conversation. Agnieszka, I think your answer on South and Central America is going to be a short answer, so I'm going to ask you if you want to weigh in a bit on your experience in the European ecosystem and growth and investment, and then give us a sense of what you've observed in South America, and then we'll hear about...
Absolutely. So space is hard, right? It's a hard business. So we have to assume that some of these companies are just not going to make it. And it's okay, right? That's how it works. And investors need to take those risks, right? They need to kind of figure it out. Where is it worth it to put their money in? It's an interesting thing that when you look at the numbers of startups in the US and in Europe, they're pretty much around the same. The number is very similar. The difference is about scale-ups, right? In the US, a lot of companies are scaling up, and in Europe they don't. They just close down the business, or they stay as very small, tiny companies, or somebody buys them, or whatever. Why is that? Because as it was pointed correctly by Alessandro, there's lots of seed money, there's lots of grants, and this is all great, but there comes the point where they actually need contracts, they need business, and that's where it gets tricky, because for governments it's difficult to give them business because it's taxpayers' money. So will they, risk it? And the ecosystem is not yet, the downstream ecosystem is not yet developed well enough to get those customers. So I'm kind of maybe jumping to also what was mentioned before, but I've seen a huge change, in this kind of awareness of how useful space technology can be. So we need to, we're reaching out to sectors that have nothing to do with space, especially with Earth observation that Mike mentioned, where we need to let them know that we are part of the solution for them, right? We can answer some of their questions, because they don't care where the data is coming from. They just want answers to their questions. And we need to let them know we're part of the solution. And and that's where those customers are going to be in agriculture, in deforestation, in insurance, in energy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so this is what is happening in Latin America, for instance. I mean, you even have less investment. It's much more difficult to grow a business, and you also often get this kind of tendency where governments sometimes feel like this private sector is competing with them a little bit. So they prefer they lobby against, they prefer that the investment comes to the national agency rather than to the private sector. And that obviously doesn't help to build that ecosystem. But we need to, we need to evangelize and kind of, because, it's the fusion of data that really is the answer, and we're delivering that data.
It's such an interesting topic. I've had a conversation with someone and who was saying, look, if the money comes to the government, or if the government is spending money, it is buying capability, space capability, from offshore, from out of region. And really, there needs to be a shift in how you think about government money, so the focus is on building regional capability, because otherwise, forever that region is a customer, never a capability.
Absolutely. If I can add to this too, I think one of the, I mean, you can see it as a problem or not. I let you decide. But building hardware is sexy, right? Everybody wants to have their own satellites. Everybody wants to have that they have a space program. So a lot of countries now, on a national level, they build constellations for various things. I mean, that's not really helping for companies to be, for startups to actually get into that business, because if the data coming from satellites is given for free, then how are they going to thrive? So instead of what you said, instead of buying capabilities, a lot of times governments are choosing to invest in their own capabilities, and that's not really helping the business. So I think this is something that we need to look at in Europe as well.
So Jay, in the environment that you're operating in, and the region that you're operating in, and in the sector of space that you're operating in, how's the big money flowing?
So before this discussion, I had a brief chat with Carissa about this issue, and she asked me, do you see any private equity investment in our region? Region meaning Korea more specifically, because we don't have a government body such as EU. I mean, in Far East, we have China, we have South Korea, we have Japan, but we all work independently, so to speak. So my answer was no. Maybe if we include some of the satellite or launch systems business, it would be a different answer. But when I talk about space investment from my perspective, I largely talk about the companies or the technologies or the platforms that are being built to enable us to go beyond LEO. So in that specific sector, we don't see any private equity activities. So personally, I went out and tried to talk to many private equity investors, like the large names, Blackstones, KKRs, Apollo. But what I realized was that, because I invest in space station business, when I tell them that we are an investor in space station, like a commercial space station, they ask me back saying, so what kind of business is that? So that was the actual response. So they just don't understand they don't know how to categorize the space station as a business. So I went back and thought about it, and we really need to change people's perspective in looking at these assets that are being built. So if we say, go out and talk to these private equity firms or institutional investors and saying that, do you want to invest in like a space infrastructure with this national space agencies being as an anchor tenant, they show interest. And then I tell them it's a space station. And, oh, okay, so is it like a data center, or is it like a real estate? So it's very close to real estate model on Earth, and then they understand. So I think the missing part when we're trying to attract more capital from these large investors is to change their perspective, change the framing. And in Korea, we are trying really hard to do that. And when we go out and try to explain what Axiom is trying to do, it's a large, no, it's not a large, it's a R&D laboratory that will host most of the space agencies around the world as an anchor tenant, and then they get it. So I think that's our role, and more work needs to be done to change people's mind.
So I want to pull that thread because it's a really interesting one. It's very difficult to change the fundamental economics of a particular business or of a sector. However, if change can be affected in terms of how it is explained, in terms of educating the community, in terms of speaking to a different investor community, I think that's really interesting. So I've had conversations around investors who focus on energy systems, big power plants. And there's some really nice parallels with certain kinds of space investments. Capital intensive, check. Long timelines, check. Challenging technology, check. Now, the one thing the energy investors are more accustomed to is relatively predictable user base and returns. And that's where it's a different conversation with many kinds of space entities. But I think that, that idea of reframing how you communicate with the investor community, either in terms of what you're communicating or with whom you're communicating, is really intriguing. So Mike the Optimist, so do you feel like there's real traction there, or is that not going to make a significant difference?
I think we can talk about it, right? I think we need to talk about customers, not technology, right? We love technology. We want to talk about customers, not technology. But then there actually have to be customers, right? So that's the other part of it. So, but I think your energy example is really good, right? So if we look at, there's an incredible amount of money going into developing small-scale nuclear systems, right? That's a very hard technology. It's got a lot of work that needs to be done. But people put money into it because the sector is energy, right? It doesn't matter that it's nuclear or small nuclear. It matters that it's a new way of selling energy, right? And when we do that, where we do that in space, that's those examples we were talking about before, right? Communications, there's an active market of all kinds of investors in that. We've seen that in launch, right? There's a clear customer base. We see quite a bit of different types of money going to launch. So I think that we need to be customer focused, but we also got to realize there has to be revenue, right? We need some revenue to show that those customers actually connect to a business line. I think we'll be successful if in any subspace market we can say that market without using the word space. So we're not space communications, we're communications, right? Yep. We're not space transportation, we're transportation, right? When we
not space pharma, we're pharma.
Right. When we can start thinking about when space can be credibly talked about, when the capability that's space-based can be credibly talked about without the space component, to me, where that's happened, that's where you see the diversity of money going to it.
And we're a community that's not well suited to doing that. Right? We are a very space-identified community, and we work in all different sectors of the community, but we have this connection, which I think is a strength in many ways, but it's very, that's a different kind of cultural approach. Agnieszka, what?
No, 100%. I mean, it's about delivering. It's about having the right narrative, right? And to think about your audience, because we have a tendency also, what you said about listening to customers. I mean, I know a lot of brilliant people in this sector, right? But a lot of times we're like, ooh, technologically, whatever, this idea is amazing. Let's build this or create this. They don't think about the market, right? Like, how are they gonna sell this later? So the thinking needs to be really, what is actually needed that can be sellable, and then build it. Yeah, it's a very different approach. It's more business-oriented rather than tech-oriented or science-oriented. I don't know how you would call it.
Okay, so Alessandra, you're working to build a space investment ecosystem, and we're coming to the conclusion that we shouldn't be talking about the space piece of it. But what's your sense of how?
I think that's what I heard really makes me, think a bit about. In fact, the role of an institution like the European Investment Bank. You would wonder how come a 90 billion, balance sheets bank, traditionally funding infrastructure and sovereigns, is active in space, and that's exactly a bit the paradigm. I mean, at the end, when we started moving into direct operations in venture debt, so financing innovation and technology, we started with biotech, but then to a certain extent, looking at some of the propositions that were coming from the space ecosystem, we saw some similarities with energy and transportation. At the end, you look at certain sectors, clean tech, biotech. When you put together, development risk, payback time, they're as risky as space. So I don't think that we heard at the beginning, yeah, space is a hard sector, but when you finance innovation and growth, I mean, there are very many other sectors that are equally risky. So that change in paradigm, I think, and that kind of education to give some commercial traction and private investment into the sector, I think it's necessary. Yeah.
I remember very early on in this, the sort of the decade of venture capital, I went out and interviewed a number of venture firms that were starting to put money into space. And one of the significant enablers was simply that space had become more acceptable as an opportunity to bring to their partners, that it was something that you could talk about. There had been a few high-profile billionaires who made a bunch of tech money, putting money into space, and so it moved from something that was not the norm to something that was part of the conversation. And I wonder if we're having the next version of this. So we've got a bit of time. I'd love to take some questions from the audience. We'll just do it the simple way and pass you a mic if we've got a question back there in the far row outside. A very energetic microphone.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Tongwane Namane. I'm from SCS Space Commercial Services, and we're a satellite engineering company based in South Africa. My question is directed at Mr. Izzo. So, the reason I came through to the session was speaking around institutional investors. So space, in terms of commercialization, comes from a traditionally military background, right, which is government, and then you had the academic era coming in, and then the space entrepreneurship era coming in, and obviously that is almost a jump into the private sector type of investing in space. So what happened with the institutional aspect, and the question that I want to ask you is, how do you see the mandate not being aligned in terms of institutional investors are supposed to actually play the role between bridging the gap with new technologies, with new industries, with industrialization, but that isn't necessarily happening. And that has to do with a large risk aversion aspect. And if institutional investors are not going to play that role regarding long payback periods, for example, and 10, 20-year project life cycles, then how can we expect the private sector to play that role? So are we going to find a situation where institutional investors are literally going to come in at the end of the curve, or is there still space for institutional investors to actually play their mandate, which is supposed to be a bridge to industrialization?
Okay, thanks. Thanks. Very, very interesting question. Well, first of all, I think we need to clarify a bit the use of terms. What do we intend by institutional investors? Do we intend public investment players like, the European Investment Bank, European Innovation Council, the EC, public, DARPA or the likes in the US, or are we looking at actually institutional money held by wealth funds, insurance companies, big private money? Because I think the role is the role and the positioning is slightly different. I mean, I totally agree with you that in any technology and sector that needs scaling up, the next sort of paradigm for growth goes through attracting the latter part of institutional money into the pot, and that's where there is a role for institutions of the former kind that we can still call institutional investors like the European Investment Bank, European Investment Fund, with the help of specialized agencies like the European Space Agency, the European Defense Agency and the likes. So we can actually look at specific key technologies and try to take part of the risk of the first technological development and rollout phase for institutional investors of the kind of venture funds, insurance companies or pension funds to come in. These type of schemes have been developed more for the sort of like scale up of sectors like clean tech today or biotech, less for space. But I think this is where some thinking is being put in understanding that there has to be kind of like a different apportionment of risk returns between different categories of institutional investors.
So I want to take the next question, but very quickly, Jay. Japan, of course, has been very active in government involvement, in motivating at least corporate investment in innovative space companies. But on this question of government institutional investors, how has that been a resource for you?
I think that will come in near future because our own space agency called CASA has been just formed this May. And I think the model that Japanese government is trying to develop with their like a private corporation such as Mitsui, like Mitsubishi, those trading houses are very applicable to us in Korea. So what we're trying to develop with CASA is to form this private-public partnership with CASA and us, and in tackling this human health problem for our Humans in Space program. And I mean, we did it even without their support, but CASA and NASA just announced recently that they will collaborate officially in tackling the human health problem in space. And they sent out a clear message. And with that support and with that intent and willingness to spend some money, I think that will flourish with the private sectors.
Thank you. And I think we have a question. Yes, somebody has the mic, so we'll go with that. And then I've got one more up front, then I think that's all I'll have time for.
Thank you for this excellent panel. My name is Sofia Biro, and I'm curious that what do you recommend for emerging European nations that are engaged in space industry but on an early level, and how to boost their space economies? So government fund is limited and small, medium-sized enterprises are already present but seems to be a bit stuck. Thank you.
A little bit. So first of all, government funding doesn't need to be limited. If you look at the GDP of US and the whole EU, Europe has money, it just spends it elsewhere, right? So that's number one. Number two is that, at least obviously for my, I'm more looking from space down to like Earth observation, this is where I come from. You can get budgets and money and investment from, there doesn't need to be a space budget, but there can be a budget to deal with deforestation, climate, environment, agriculture. And that's where they should buy solutions to mitigate those problems. And some of those solutions are space solutions. So we need to be also creative how we approach governments and not think with that space lens, at least in some areas. Because the money is there, we just need to know how to approach it.
Thank you. And we've got time for one more question.
I want to jump in there. I want to, and I don't know, I want to actually, in that question, I think Poland is a really good example.
I'm from Poland.
I know. I think Poland's right. I think Poland's doing a couple things that are really interesting. One, they've capitalized on, they've seen the advantages of space from a national security perspective and are thinking about those capabilities. But also, I think they've done a good job of categorizing their capabilities, whether that's in certain hardware areas or certain software or computing areas, and seeing how they can partner either with other European nations or with other companies to help develop their homegrown capabilities, but in a partnership model. So I think there's probably a lot to learn from their activity just in the last few years.
Thank you, Mike. So one final question. It's a bit of a lightning round question, so we'll have an interesting but quick answer.
Hi, my name is Akshat Jori. I'm from India. I work for a financial institution in India. My question is to Mr. Alessandro, in fact, all the panelists. Space is critical infrastructure. It's a sector which is, like Mr. French mentioned, connectivity-based. It's very much like telecommunication towers. It's very much like mass transit. It's important to us. It's crucial for us, in fact. How come when you mention numbers of venture capitalists spending 70%, private equity being 5%, like infrastructure projects are funded under project financing, there is no debt, long-term debt funding here? How has that not been done so far? Because the concession period, because we had a session of PPP just before this, where concession periods were discussed. And we do fund, even India funds, new tech like renewable energy, like biotech, under infrastructure. So how come there is no long-term funding for debt?
Absolutely, jump in.
I was going to say one case that I've talked to a very large debt-based financing firm. It's that they didn't have they needed to see more of a revenue expectation to pay off that debt in the tail, right? So that's where energy works, because even if it's a new technology, they're able to quantify possible energy-based returns to pay off the debt. Very difficult when it's an emerging market.
If I can add on this, I mean, we have financed, we've looked at financing space infrastructure on a fixed income, long-term debt basis with returns that are commensurate to that risk. If, using the analogy of came on the use of a space station, you can actually stabilize the cash flows of the use of the infrastructure to repay debt. But, there is also debt that can be provided, but at returns that are closer to equity if you do not have that stabilization of, your, cash flows, your demand and revenue side, and with a high technology risk. I mean, in the bank, we have a team that has a dedicated product for scale-up debt that is actually supporting those type of business ventures in scaling up. But if you do not have the stability of cash flows and in view of cash flows, well, the returns are not going to be those that you can expect for a PPP in an infrastructure.
Any final? Yep, Jay?
So I can speak in terms of a space station business. Because it's the first time for a private company to build a space station, the investors feel unsafe, I guess. But I have seen some large US banks who are saying that if a company successfully launch a module, then they are willing to create a leasing model on top of the second module. So I think once we show that this can be done, the flow of the air will just dramatically change.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for being part of this discussion. I think this is a discussion we'll be having in future years. Some really interesting paths forward, and I want to ask you to join me in thanking our excellent panel for being here today. Absolutely. And it was incredible.
Great question. Thank you. That was awesome. Great question. Great question. Hard question.
I love that.